Hi there, this is Catherine with Unfolded Heart Music. Welcome back to Lyre Foundations. I hope you've been enjoying the course and that it's been of help to you. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 3, Lesson 4. This will cover chord exercises, and I'll be able to share with you a few additional thoughts and examples in addition to the book. So let's go ahead and take a look, and I'll start with some beginning comments and explanations. Okay, so again, we're going to be looking at chord exercises today. If you don't know what a chord is, it's simply when you play more than one note at the same time. It could be anywhere from 2 notes to 8 notes. It really doesn't matter. They're all chords. So we're going to be practicing that skill and walking through those exercises. But before we do, I want to walk through a couple of bullet points that are listed on page 28, just to give you a few tips and some direction of what to think about as you go through these. So the first is that your main focus on these exercises is going to be first playing the notes at the same time, rather than having them staggered, which I'll illustrate, and second, having them be at the same volume. Now both of those sort of ironically in more advanced playing, which I'll talk about in a moment, you can also adjust in ways that can help make your music sing even more. But for the beginning, you want to focus again on same time and same volume of striking those strings. Okay, the second point is a more practical point, and that is looking at the hand that is behind the lyre, in the back of the lyre. I'll raise this up a little bit. Mine is my left hand. If you cannot get to the top of your lyre well with that left hand or with that back hand, you don't need to worry about that, in my opinion. It really depends on how your lyre is built. But you will almost never find a piece where you need to play a chord in particular at the very top of your lyre. So I wouldn't stress if you can't get there. I wouldn't stress about doing that. I would honestly just not do that at all. I'd turn around at whatever part of the lyre makes the most sense for you in regards to what you can reach. So even though the music will be telling you to go higher, you don't need to do that if you can't easily access that with your particular build. With that, also, if you don't have a 19 string, even if you don't have something like a 16 string, if you have like a 10 string, anywhere around 10 strings, these will also work for you because they simply go the range of your particular lyre, except for the very last line of these exercises. So this could be useful to you if you don't, again, have 16 or 19 strings. It's a good example of one area in which it's a direct application for you. Okay. A few more points. I mentioned that there are certain ways in which you can change both the volume and also the timing of the chords. And this is, once you get these exercises down pretty well, you can go ahead and do this. The first is voicing, which I'll illustrate, but it's simply to make that top note a little bit louder so that we can hear the melody more clearly and it's not drowned out by other notes. This second idea is that you can also make it into a broken chord, which is not necessarily better than a normal chord. It's simply a different option, and I'll show you what that looks like and what that sounds like. If you're not sure what that symbol looks like, you can take a look in Lesson 4, Chapter 4 in Part 2 of this book, and there's a little discussion and illustration of what that looks like in sheet music itself. The final point is that once you have these exercises down, at least some of them, I would really practice putting them in context. Again, I will give an example of that, but you want to be able to go in and out of chords with greater comfort so that you're using them in the context in which they will likely be used in pieces, whether that's somebody else has written them or you'd like to experiment with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the exercises themselves. I will give some examples to help illustrate what I've just spoken about and written about in the book so that you have a better idea of what these techniques are actually all about. Okay, so we're on page 29 now. The lesson begins on page 28, but the practice exercises are on page 29. Again, I'm not going to be playing through all of these. It's not really what the videos are for. They're more to complement rather than to replicate or go through in its entirety the book. But a couple things to note before we really get into it. First is simply that each line is an exercise except for the very last one. The last one is every 2 measures is a different exercise. And then also that the numbers above each chord indicate the finger that I recommend you using. Now for especially exercise 1 and 5, you could also use a 1 and 3 to play either of those, but I've specified for exercise 1, 1 and 2, and exercise 5, 1 and 4, exercise 5 fingers 1 and 4, exercise 1 fingers 1 and 2. I've done that so that you can practice using your 2 and your 4, whereas the 3 already gets a lot of practice. So I would go ahead and stick with these suggestions, but just so you have some context of why those are like that. Okay, so let's go through some basic steps, essentially, that I would recommend you walking through these exercises with. So as with the placement exercises, I would not begin as the practice is written concretely, where you're traveling up the lyre and then down the lyre. I'd rather start in the very middle. I like to do A and C. So we're going to take exercise 1. This is a third, an interval of a third. And we have our 1 on A and our 2 on C. And simply practice playing them at the same time. Again, you want to listen to make sure you're playing them actually at the same time rather than something like that. You also want to make sure that the volume is the same right now. We're working on control and developing muscle memory for a particular interval. Now with the placement exercises, you've already done this to a certain extent. That is, gotten some muscle memory for the distance between certain strings. These exercises for the chords will continue to further that, because you want to have a pretty good idea of what at least the major intervals feel like, so that you can play them without much thought anywhere on the lyre. So begin in the center, and once it feels comfortable, then go ahead and start working on being able to move up, all the way up your lyre, and then so focus on that as its own exercise, and then coming back down as a separate exercise. When you're comfortable with that, go ahead and add them together so that it's one smooth exercise, up and then down. You do it with both hands, not at the same time, though you could. One thing you can work on, especially on these lower notes, is having a firm placement. The reason for that is because when I strike this string, these two strings, the F and the A, and then I move, the third place I'm at, this A is probably, depending on my speed, going to still be vibrating. So if I have a hesitant finger, when I place it on here, a hesitant placement, it's going to buzz. You couldn't hear it very much, but there's a little bit of a buzz there. I can also catch my finger, my fingernail, the back of my finger, on these and get a buzz. So the movement adds a different aspect to the exercise. So just as you are working in the middle on one particular level of control, now you are sustaining that control as you move up the lyre. Okay? So exercises 1 through 5 do the same thing, just at different intervals. I've skipped a 7th because it's very rare that you will have a 7th on its own, and it just doesn't sound very good. You're welcome to add that in if you so desire. But otherwise, they're all the same. Exercises 6 and 7 then add a little bit of a different aspect in that they're not 2-noted chords, but they're 3 and then 4-noted chords. So for exercise 6, again, start in the middle, get all of those nice and equal, then focus on moving. Same with 7. We have here the same as exercise 6, but we add that octave in there. So get that nice and strong and consistent. And then again, go ahead and add that movement in there. Now here is where the idea of broken chords and of voicing can come in. I wouldn't, well, you could do some voicing on the 2-noted chords for sure. I really wouldn't do a broken chord because it really just kind of sounds like you didn't get it right. But certainly with the 3 and 4-noted chords, you could do both. So I want to illustrate what each of these means. With the voicing, I emphasized a moment ago having the same volume. The reason for that is you want to have control to be able to have the same amount of strength in each finger. The problem with this is that a lot of times your primary melodic note, it's usually your top note, is can be drowned out by the other notes. You hear it, but it's on an even playing field as these other notes that are actually meant to accompany it, not distract it. So what you can do is essentially play this top note a little bit louder. I actually don't play this one louder, I play these two softer. But in comparison to the other ones, you play the top note louder. So here's not voicing, and here is voicing. Not voicing. Yes, voicing. So to add a little bit of comparison even more, if I were to play this single note, which is my melody line, by itself, that's nice. But if I want to add a little something into it, here's playing with a voicing. You can tell a big difference. Even though these I'm really almost barely striking, I am still doing it with a lot of control and purpose. I'm not just sort of gliding over it, but I'm not doing it all with the same strength. So comparing those three, a single note, a voiced chord, and then just a normal chord, you can kind of hear that difference there. So they're just really sort of different elements that you can play with in various songs. Especially if you have something going on in the left hand too, plus a chord in the right hand, it is easy for that top note to get drowned out a little bit. The way in which you do that is twofold. One is to just put a little bit more pressure pushing on the string on that top one. And also I even kind of, I wouldn't say turn my hand, but sort of lean it towards that top note a little bit so that it's easier to put more pressure of my hand on that top note compared to these two. But again, I would not even touch something like that until you're really comfortable with the chords. Otherwise, it's not an addition to your skill set. It rather is retracting from your capacity to play chords in the first place. Okay. Then broken chords is simply playing each note on its own, but you do it not like you would an arpeggio. That would be an arpeggio. Rather, it's much quicker. You can do this with the left hand as well. The way to practice this would be to do, does that make sense? Yeah, an arpeggio from the bottom to the top. So playing each one of these strings and then a little bit faster. And then rather, in your mind, rather than thinking of them as different notes, think of it as just one fell. You can also simply go from playing them as chords to then broken chords. With a broken chord, I almost always voice that top note because otherwise it gets really drowned out by especially those bass notes. Okay, so that's broken chords. Again, if you want to see what that looks like in sheet music, take a look in part 2. That's chapter 4, lesson 4. Okay. Then finally, the last line of exercises. This is really illustrating some of the primary chords, not all of them, but some of the primary chords, and also primary inversions. And just is another way for you to practice some of these chords. I have the same things written, but in A minor and in C major. helps with movement back and forth. This would be the inversions. Oops, sorry. Let me do that one more time. I got a little distracted. Okay, and again, work with those in the best way that that you can. Those are to introduce you to some of the primary chords, primary inversions, and also to therefore familiarize you with some chords that are going to be pretty dominant in various pieces, and that you might want to also integrate into your own work. Okay, I forgot one thing really quick, which is actually very essential, and that is to practice putting these chords in context. And what I mean by that is to just do something extremely simple by starting and ending with, or to break this into smaller pieces, let's just start with some single notes and end with a chord. So say I want to simply do, let's do A, B, C, B, and then C. And you can do that really, really slowly. But rather than ending on the simple C, let's go ahead and add an A with that C. So here's the phrase with the chord. And again, I would really do it much slower than that. I do it something like this. When you're just starting out. You want to start out slower than you need to go so that you can really have control over what you're doing. It'll be much easier to build from there than starting kind of on the edge of what you can do. Okay, and then the opposite direction can also be true. So let's start with a chord and then end with oops. And then you can put them together. The point is to practice going into and coming out of chords, because you'll need to focus on having your fingers, more than one finger in a certain place, and to have control over that, compared to only focusing on one finger. And it is a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. So practice that. Once you basically finish one of the exercises, go ahead and put it in context of just a tiny little phrase so that you can really work on that as well. Okay, now we're going to end with concluding comments. I think that is actually everything. Alrighty, so that's going to close this section, this lesson for today. I hope it's helpful for you and that these concepts are a bit more clear, seeing how I've done it, and also some examples of these exercises. Of course, if you have chords that you want to work on that aren't written in here, I would start with these, since these are really kind of the nuts and bolts of different chords, and they're really meant to strengthen those fingers in this context. But then take your own chord and apply it within the framework of these exercises, and feel free to be flexible. These are not all the exercises that you could do by any means, so go ahead and be creative with that if it's something that's helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to reach out to me personally via email, or to do so in the comments below. As always, I hope it's helpful, and I just wish you the very best on your lyre playing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope the series continues to be of use to you. Thank you so much. May the peace of Christ be with you, and God bless you.